What happens when winning isn't enough? Mexico defeated one of the most powerful armies in the world. They weren't supposed to win. But that's not the part people get wrong. The real story is what happened after. Because this victory didn't stop the invasion, it didn't end the war, and it didn't save the country. In fact, it led to something even worse: a foreign empire, a stolen throne, and an ending that turned a miracle into a warning. So how do you win a battle like that and still lose almost everything? To understand that, we have to go back. To understand how a victory like that wasn't enough, you have to go back to 1861. Mexico wasn't stable, it wasn't strong, and it definitely wasn't ready for a war. Years of internal conflict had left the country exhausted. Governments had risen and fallen. Power shifted constantly, and the economy was collapsing. So the government made a decision, a desperate one. They stopped paying their debts, not just to one country, but to some of the most powerful nations in the world: Spain, Britain, and France. From Mexico's perspective, it was survival. They needed time. Time to rebuild, time to recover. But to Europe, it looked like defiance. And defiance comes with consequences. So they responded. Ships arrived, troops landed, a message was sent. Pay what you owe, or we take it. At first, this didn't look like a full invasion, more like pressure, a show of force, something meant to intimidate, not conquer. But then something changed. Spain pulled back, Britain followed. They reached agreements, they left. Only one country stayed: France. And that's when everything shifted. Because France wasn't there just to collect a debt. They were there for something much bigger. Led by Napoleon III, France saw an opportunity. A weakened country, a divided government, a chance to expand power beyond Europe. Mexico wasn't just in debt anymore, it was vulnerable. And vulnerability invites control. Think about that for a second. You're trying to recover just to survive as a country, and suddenly, some of the most powerful nations in the world are at your doorstep. Not negotiating, not waiting, but deciding what happens to you next. And now, what started as pressure was about to become something else entirely. Because France wasn't leaving, they were moving forward, and standing in their way was Puebla. The French army moved inland, confident, experienced, and expecting this to be quick. Their objective was simple: reach Mexico City, end the resistance, take control. But before they could do that, they had to pass through Puebla, a fortified city positioned directly in their path, defended by Mexican forces led by Ignacio Zaragoza. On paper, this wasn't even a fight. The French army was one of the most powerful in the world, battle-tested, well-trained, better armed, better supplied. The Mexican forces? Outnumbered, under-equipped, and facing a military they were never meant to defeat. Everything pointed to one outcome: a French victory. Then, May 5, 1862, the Battle of Puebla. The French advanced, certain, disciplined, prepared for a short battle. But Puebla didn't fall. The Mexican army held their ground. They used the terrain. They relied on defensive positions at forts like Loreto and Guadalupe. Every French advance met resistance. Every push was answered. The battle dragged on, longer than expected, harder than expected, and something started to shift. Momentum. The French began to lose it. Their attacks weakened, their formations broke, and then they retreated. Against all expectations, Mexico had won. An undertrained, outmatched army had just defeated one of the most powerful militaries in the world. It shouldn't have happened, but it did. Moments like that change everything. Not just on the battlefield, but in the minds of the people watching. Because suddenly, what felt impossible doesn't anymore. For Mexico, this wasn't just a victory, it was proof. Proof they could resist. Proof they could fight back. Proof that they weren't powerless. But here's the problem. A single victory doesn't end a war, and it definitely doesn't stop an empire. Because while Mexico was celebrating, France was preparing to come back, stronger, more determined, and this time, they weren't going to lose. The French came back, better prepared, and this time, they didn't stop. They pushed deeper into Mexico. City after city fell, resistance weakened, defenses collapsed, and eventually, they reached Mexico City. The capital fell, and just like that, the victory at Puebla was no longer enough. But France didn't just want control. They wanted something that looked permanent, something that looked legitimate, so they made a decision. They installed an emperor, a European royal, Maximilian I of Mexico. Maximilian wasn't alone. By his side was his wife, Carlotta, Empress of Mexico. And in many ways, she believed in the empire more than he did. She wasn't just present, she was involved, political, active, committed to making this new empire work. But the foundation they were standing on was already unstable. Imagine being placed in charge of a country where your authority comes from foreign soldiers, where the people never asked for you, where your power depends on an army that can leave at any moment. That's not stability, that's a countdown. To many in Mexico, Maximilian wasn't a ruler. He was a symbol of foreign control, of invasion, of everything they had already fought against. And resistance didn't disappear. It grew. Guerrilla warfare spread, opposition hardened, and the empire started to crack. Because the truth is, Maximilian's rule was never secure. It depended on one thing, France. And France was already starting to pull away. Carlotta saw it before anyone else wanted to admit it. If France left, everything would collapse. So she acted. In 1866, she left Mexico, traveling to Europe, determined to save the empire, to convince Napoleon III to stay, to protect her husband, to protect everything they had built. But when she arrived, she found something very different. Napoleon refused. France was leaving. The decision had already been made. And in that moment, something inside her broke. Carlotta became convinced that people were trying to kill her, poison her, betray her. She stopped trusting those around her, refused to eat, at times, testing food on others before she would touch it. She moved from place to place, searching for safety, for help, for someone to stop what was already happening. She went to the Vatican to plead her case, to beg for intervention. But even there, she wasn't safe in her own mind. The fear didn't stop, the paranoia didn't fade, and the empire she had tried to save continued to collapse without her. Carlotta never returned to rule. She never recovered. And while the empire was falling apart in Mexico, she was already gone. Not physically, mentally. Back in Mexico, everything was unraveling. Because when France began to pull away, everything changed. The empire Maximilian depended on started to disappear. French troops were withdrawn, support faded, and the foundation of his power collapsed. Maximilian was warned. He was given a choice: leave Mexico and survive, or stay and fight. He stayed. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was belief, maybe he thought he could still hold everything together. But the reality was already set. Without French support, his position became impossible. His forces weakened, control slipped away, and the resistance closed in, until eventually he was surrounded, captured, and brought to trial. In 1867, Maximilian I of Mexico was sentenced to death. A European royal, placed on a throne he was never meant to sit on, executed in a country that never accepted him. Think about how this ends. Maximilian lost his life, but Carlotta lost something far harder to measure. And that brings us back to May 5th, the Battle of Puebla, a victory, a moment that should have changed everything, but didn't. Because the truth is, Mexico didn't win the war that day. They won something smaller, something temporary. Time, hope, a reminder that even the impossible can still happen. But history isn't always about who wins. Sometimes, it's about what those moments represent. Because even though that victory didn't stop what came next, it proved something that couldn't be taken away. That resistance was possible. even against overwhelming odds. History doesn't always give you clean endings. Sometimes, a victory is just the beginning of something darker. And sometimes, the stories we celebrate hide what really happened next. If you want more stories like this, where history isn't what it seems, subscribe for more sugar-coated secrets.